She thought she could humiliate the kindest man in Hollywood on live TV. But when Joy Behar crossed a sacred line, attacking the one thing Keanu Reeves never speaks about, something inside him snapped. He stood up, removed his mic, and what he did next stunned the world. Why did he walk off The View that day? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The cameras didn't catch the moment his heart cracked, but they caught everything else. Keanu Reeves rose slowly from his seat on the set of The View, his face unreadable, his jaw locked in quiet disbelief. For a man known around the world for his grace under pressure, the silence in that studio said more than 1,000 headlines ever could. He removed his microphone with steady fingers. The tape peeled with a soft click, barely audible over the stunned hush that fell across the audience. Then he placed the mic on the host table, pushed in his chair, and without a single glance back, walked off the set. The audience gasped. Some leaned forward, others exchanged glances, many simply froze, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The warm studio lights reflected off the polished floor as Keanu walked toward the exit, his shadow trailing behind him like the final punctuation on a sentence no one ever expected to hear. Joy Behar stared, her expression a mix of confusion and something that looked suspiciously like regret. Around her, the other hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Sunny Hostin, Sarah Haynes, sat in stunned silence. Not one of them had foreseen this. Not even the producers watching from behind the glass could believe it. And yet, it was happening. Keanu Reeves, Hollywood's soft-spoken icon, had just walked out. Not with anger, not with a storm of words, but with the kind of power that comes from being pushed too far. The internet would explode in minutes. Clips would be shared, headlines would swirl, millions would debate what they had just seen, but the truth of that moment, raw, unfiltered, unforgettable, belonged to the people in that room. And it began long before Keanu stood up. It began with a question, a cruel question, one that took a man's deepest grief and held it up for judgment. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This was the day America's favorite morning talk show became ground zero for one of the most emotional confrontations ever seen on live television. Because what started as a friendly promotional appearance for John Wick 4 quickly unraveled into a televised ambush, one that weaponized a man's pain for ratings, one that targeted not just his career, but the quiet tragedies he never spoke of publicly. Keanu came onto the set expecting a conversation. Instead, he found himself in a crossfire. Joy Behar, known for her boldness, had prepared something far darker than anyone anticipated. She didn't just question his choices or challenge his opinions. She dug into his personal life with surgical cruelty. She pried open old wounds. She twisted facts. And when she finally touched the one thing no human being should ever weaponize, his daughter's memory, everything changed. That's when Keanu stood up. That's when everything stopped. And that's when millions realized they weren't watching a movie star anymore. They were watching a man take back his dignity, live, and unscripted. The cameras kept rolling as Keanu disappeared behind the stage curtains. For a few long seconds, no one in the studio dared to move. Not the audience, not the hosts, not even the floor crew. You could feel the tension like static in the air, buzzing, invisible, heavy. Joy Behar blinked rapidly, her hands frozen on the cue cards in front of her. She hadn't expected this. She had expected maybe a tense response, maybe a disagreement she could steer into a headline, but not this. Not the quiet exit that roared louder than any argument. Behind the scenes, Keanu's agent Marcus pushed past two stunned interns to meet him backstage. He called out, "Keanu," but his voice sounded distant, even to himself. When he finally caught up, Keanu had already reached the green room door. He didn't slam it shut. He didn't curse or yell. He just opened it, stepped inside, and sat down, completely still. Back on stage, Whoopi Goldberg tried to speak, but no words came. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She looked at Joy. She looked at the audience. Her face said everything. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This wasn't television. This was a human being brought to the brink in front of millions. The broadcast cut to a commercial too late, but not before viewers saw the shift in Joy's expression. Not before they saw Sarah lean away from the table, shaking her head slowly. Not before they saw Sunny lower her eyes, unable to look at the camera. It was too real, too cruel, too far. Within minutes, the internet was ablaze. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, every platform flooded with clips, reactions, and hashtags. Keanu walks out. Justice for Keanu. The View explodes. Some viewers defended Joy's hard questions, calling them journalism, but most were horrified. What had started as a celebrity appearance had turned into something more raw than any scripted drama could deliver. And at the center of it all was one question, echoing louder than the rest. What did Joy Behar say about Keanu Reeves' daughter that made him walk off The View? That was the mystery everyone wanted solved, not just for gossip or spectacle, but because the moment had exposed something deeper. People weren't just watching a man walk out. They were watching a moment of truth, a fracture between what television pretends to be and what it really is, behind the lights and applause. In that one quiet act, standing up, removing a mic, and leaving the room, Keanu had said more about pain, dignity, and humanity than any scripted speech ever could. What came before it was cruel, what followed would be explosive. And it all began with one line Joy Behar never should have crossed. By the time the broadcast returned from commercial, it was already too late to control the narrative. Clips of Keanu's silent walkout had already gone viral. Viewers weren't waiting for the official story, they were writing it themselves in real time. Thousands of comments poured in by the minute. Most were furious, heartbroken, or stunned. Some simply repeated the same line over and over. You do not talk about a man's dead daughter on live television. But that was exactly what had happened. Joy Behar, in a moment that would be dissected for years, had crossed a sacred boundary. What began as a smug line of questioning about celebrity privilege spiraled into a brutal attempt to dismantle Keanu's public image. She questioned his charity. She mocked his humility. Then she made the fatal decision to imply that the tragedies Keanu had endured were somehow part of a performance, that maybe he wasn't so kind, maybe he wasn't so good, maybe he was just another Hollywood liar selling a carefully crafted myth. And that's when she brought up Ava, his daughter, the child he never got to hold, the little girl he lost before he could even become the father he was ready to be. There are lines you don't cross, even in politics, even in scandal, even in entertainment. This was one of them. No one in the studio had expected it, not the producers, not the other hosts, and certainly not Keanu. He had come to talk about a film. He had come to honor commitments, to be respectful, to play his part as a guest. But what he walked into wasn't a conversation, it was a firing squad, disguised as morning TV. And when Joy pulled that trigger, the audience didn't hear gunfire. They heard silence. Keanu didn't yell, he didn't threaten. He didn't even raise his voice. He stood, removed his mic, and walked away with a dignity so absolute it left every person watching breathless. Because sometimes the most powerful protest isn't loud. It's the absence left behind when someone refuses to be broken. What Joy said about Keanu's daughter crossed a line no one should ever approach. And what Keanu did next, how he responded not with vengeance but with conviction, would echo across the country for months to come. This was no longer a story about a film promo gone wrong. This was a story about grief, about boundaries, about dignity in the face of cruelty. And if you think the walkout was the peak of the confrontation, you haven't seen what happened after. What Keanu said backstage, what Joy admitted live on air, and what the world learned about pain, kindness, and the cost of pushing too far. Now the question isn't why he walked out, it's what would you have done in his place? The morning began like most others inside ABC's Manhattan studios, but there was an edge to the air no one could quite explain. Stagehands adjusted rigging with more urgency. Interns shuffled cue cards like they were afraid of dropping them. One of the production assistants spilled coffee on a camera dolly and swore under her breath before anyone noticed. The studio wasn't tense, it was bracing. At precisely 9:30 a.m., Keanu Reeves stepped out of a black SUV and walked through the side entrance with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to announce his presence. He wore a simple black suit with no tie, his hair slightly tousled, carrying nothing but a small paperback tucked in his hand. No entourage, no publicist. Just his longtime agent Marcus trailing behind him, already mid-phone call, his voice hushed and urgent. Keanu greeted the receptionist with a gentle nod. "Morning," he said softly, and she blinked like she hadn't expected him to be so normal. "Studio 4B, Marcus whispered as he ended his call. "We're doing makeup in 5. Remember, this is just to promote the movie. Stick to John Wick 4. Don't open any doors they can push you through." Keanu gave him a look, part amused, part tired. "I'm not here to start anything, Marcus." "I know. I'm saying that because they might be." The two passed a row of framed posters from past View episodes, and Keanu slowed when he noticed a wall of signatures from guests. His name was already there, written years ago in faded blue marker. A simpler time, maybe, or just a different one. Inside the makeup room, the lights were warm, the smell of setting spray clung to the air, and a young woman named Angela motioned for Keanu to sit. She didn't speak for the first few minutes, just worked quietly, brushing powder under his eyes and smoothing down his hair. The mirror reflected more than just his face. It reflected his patience, his weariness, the lines of a man who had lived through more than he ever talked about. Then Angela leaned in slightly and whispered, "Can I tell you something?" Keanu looked at her through the mirror. "Of course." "Joy's in a mood today," she said carefully. "Like a serious mood. I heard the producers talking. She's been rehearsing her questions for hours." Keanu didn't blink. "That's not unusual, is it?" "It is for her. Usually she just wings it." Marcus looked up from his phone. "Define serious mood." Angela bit her lip, hesitating. "She's intense. Like she's planning something. I don't know what exactly. I just got this weird vibe. Like she's not just interested in the movie." Keanu offered a gentle smile. "Thanks for the heads up." But in the mirror, he looked away. His eyes narrowed slightly, like he was scanning his own memory, trying to make sense of the feeling that was beginning to rise in his chest. Something was off, and he was starting to feel it too. Angela stepped back to examine her work, giving a faint nod of approval. "You're good to go, Mr. Reeves." Keanu stood, smoothing his jacket. "Thanks, Angela. I appreciate your honesty." As he walked toward the door, Marcus followed close behind, scrolling rapidly through a series of messages from the studio's PR team. "Okay, here's the rundown. You're scheduled for segment 2. That gives us 6 minutes on air. Just 6. Don't overthink it. Quick beats. Mention the new fight choreography, the director, maybe throw in something about training. Be charming, but don't give them room to pivot." Keanu chuckled under his breath. "You rehearsed that in the car?" "Rehearsed it in my sleep," Marcus muttered. They turned a corner and entered the staging area. The space was cluttered but efficient. Cords taped to the floor, TV monitors flickering, PAs wearing headsets hustling past. A laminated schedule hung on the wall. Keanu glanced at it instinctively, scanning the rundown. Something caught his eye. There was no mention of his segment topics. No bullet points, no themes, just a label. Guest interview, Keanu Reeves. Bear. He looked at Marcus. Where's the question list? Marcus stopped cold. What? I always get a preview. Even Letterman used to send outlines. There's nothing here. Just then, a middle-aged producer in a headset approached them with a clipboard in hand and a too bright smile. Mr. Reeves, so glad to have you. If you could wait right here, we'll cue you right after the next segment. Keanu nodded. Can I see the questions? The producer hesitated for half a second too long. Well, we like to keep it more spontaneous on The View. You know, organic, natural chemistry. Keanu's smile didn't reach his eyes. I understand that. Still, it helps to know where the conversation might lead. The producer shrugged. Just relax. You'll be great. They love you. He walked away too quickly, leaving a trail of tension behind him. Marcus looked at Keanu. That's not normal. No, it's not. You want to pull out? Keanu shook his head. We're here now. Then listen to me. Marcus stepped in front of him, lowering his voice. Joy's got a reputation. If she wants to stir something, she'll find a way. You start talking about kindness, she'll call it virtue signaling. You mention charity, she'll say it's for attention. Just nod, smile, and redirect to John Wick 4. Don't let her bait you. Keanu stared past him, through the stage curtain toward the soft hum of the studio lights. His voice was calm. I don't mind being challenged. Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then he added, You mind being humiliated? Keanu didn't answer right away, but the flicker in his eyes said enough. There was something in the air that morning, an invisible thread pulling everything toward a moment no one could stop, and even before the cameras rolled, Keanu Reeves could feel it tightening around him. A production assistant stepped in and motioned toward the entry ramp. Mr. Reeves, you're up in 3 minutes. Keanu followed her down a narrow hallway toward the stage entrance. Just before stepping into position, he paused. From behind the curtain, he could hear the distant murmur of the hosts' voices, followed by scattered laughter. Then he heard Joy's voice. It carried above the others, sharp, clipped, deliberate. Smee's already in character, Marcus whispered behind him. Just remember, you're not. Keanu didn't respond. He adjusted the sleeves of his suit, then clasped his hands together and took a breath, long and steady. The hallway was dimly lit, but the entrance to the stage glowed with hot, artificial light. Beyond it, the world was watching. And somewhere inside, something didn't feel right. Something's off, Keanu murmured. What do you mean? Marcus asked. I don't know. It's the tone of the room. It's like walking into a dinner party where you know someone wants to start a fight, that someone is probably wearing red glasses and carrying a grudge. Keanu allowed himself the faintest smile, but it disappeared quickly. The assistant held up 2 fingers. 2 minutes. Keanu looked down at the floor for a moment, letting everything settle. His heartbeat was steady, his breathing calm. He was used to pressure. He had endured years of interviews, critics, emotional landmines. But this felt different. He turned slightly and said to Marcus, If she wants a fight, I won't give it to her. I'm counting on that, Marcus replied. But if she crosses a line, you don't have to smile through it either. 1 minute. The voices on stage shifted. Whoopi's tone changed as she transitioned the show toward the guest segment. The crowd clapped as the music cue rolled. The producer signaled the countdown. Keanu gave a small nod to Marcus, then stepped forward into the spotlight. The curtain parted just enough for him to see the table, the cameras, and the 4 women seated across from his designated chair. It was quiet in those last 5 seconds before he entered. Too quiet. And that's when he felt it. Clear as lightning, cutting through clouds. He wasn't walking into a celebration. He was walking into a setup. And though he didn't yet know the shape of the storm ahead, Keanu Reeves knew one thing with complete certainty. He wasn't the one about to lose control. The show's opening words echoed across the studio as the audience roared. Please welcome Keanu Reeves. The trap was now set, and the man stepping onto that stage was about to find out how far someone would go to try to break him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whoopi Goldberg's voice rang out through the brightly lit studio. "Our next guest is one of the most beloved figures in film, known for his roles in The Matrix, Speed, and of course, John Wick. But beyond the action, he's someone we admire for his humility, his kindness, and his quiet strength. Please welcome Keanu Reeves." The audience erupted into applause. A few people even stood up. Phones went up instinctively. Flashes sparkled against the backdrop. The energy shifted immediately as Keanu stepped onto the stage. Not with the swagger of a star, but with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove. He smiled, a small, genuine curve of the lips that somehow made the giant studio feel more intimate. He made his way toward the host's table as the camera panned across the room. Keanu reached Whoopi first and leaned down to give her a polite kiss on the cheek. She smiled warmly and squeezed his hand. Next was Sonny Hostin, who rose to shake his hand enthusiastically. Then came Sarah Haynes, who greeted him with a kind nod and a soft, "Good to see you, Keanu." Everything was flowing smoothly, until he reached Joy Behar. She remained seated. She offered her hand, stiffly, with fingers barely extended. No smile, no warmth, just a handshake that felt like a warning. Keanu didn't flinch. He took her hand politely, gave a gentle squeeze, and replied, "Nice to meet you, Joy." She answered with a tight smile that didn't come close to her eyes. "Pleasure," she said, but the tone was flat, cold, distant. The audience noticed. The applause softened just slightly, not enough to cause a scene, but enough to shift the mood. Keanu moved to his seat, adjusted the small mic clipped to his jacket, and sat upright, with his usual calm presence. The first few moments were pleasant. Whoopi kicked things off with a broad smile. "So, Keanu, you're back in action again with John Wick 4. I saw the trailer. I swear my blood pressure hasn't come down yet. You never stop." Keanu laughed softly. "It's definitely been an intense ride. We've been training for months. The stunts this time around, we really pushed the edge." Sonny leaned in. "I heard you did 90% of your own fight scenes. Is that true?" He nodded modestly. "Yeah, we worked with a great team. The choreography was amazing. I wanted it to feel grounded, but still, a little heightened. It's a dance in a way." Sarah added with a light laugh. "A deadly dance, maybe." Keanu grinned. "Yeah. Hopefully one people enjoy watching, just not trying at home." The audience chuckled. The tension eased. For a moment, it felt like any other morning interview. A big-name guest promoting a film, surrounded by hosts who were smiling, engaged, supportive. Even Joy nodded a few times, flipping through her note cards without speaking. But then she stopped flipping and slowly leaned forward. Her smile returned, but this time it had edges. Keanu noticed the change instantly. The tone in Joy's posture shifted. She wasn't just preparing to ask a question, she was bracing to make a statement. Her fingers drummed against her note cards like a judge about to deliver a verdict. "So, Keanu," she said slowly, stretching his name with a deliberate pause, "you've done everything from kung fu to Shakespeare. You've been called the nicest guy in Hollywood more times than I can count. But I'm curious." She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing just enough to be noticed. "Do you consider yourself politically conscious?" The air in the studio changed again. It was subtle. The laughter stopped. A few people in the audience exchanged glances. It wasn't the question itself, it was the tone. It came from left field. There was no natural segue. It had nothing to do with movies, stunts, or acting. Keanu blinked once. "Politically conscious?" he repeated, softly. Joy nodded. Do you feel like you use your platform in a way that reflects an awareness of the real struggles everyday Americans face?" The tension wrapped itself around the edges of the room like invisible thread. Sunny and Sarah went still. Whoopi's eyes narrowed slightly, unsure of what was coming next. Keanu took a breath and answered carefully. I try to stay informed. I think it's important to understand what people are going through, but I also try to focus on respect, on kindness. I don't claim to be an expert on everything. I just try to show up for people where I can. It was a fair answer, honest, measured. But Joy wasn't satisfied. She leaned back and smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. Interesting, she said, because I've heard people say that artists like you, Hollywood artists, live in a kind of bubble, a very privileged one. Keanu's expression remained calm, but something behind his eyes flickered. He wasn't surprised. He had felt the tension building since before the lights went up. But he hadn't expected the gloves to come off this soon. I wouldn't know if it's a bubble, he said, his voice still even. I ride the subway. I talk to people. I've worked with crews, with drivers, with people who show up every day and do incredible work. I try to treat everyone with the same dignity, no matter what industry we're in. Joy chuckled, but it wasn't the kind of laugh you hear when someone appreciates an answer. It was sharp, almost dismissive. Spoken like a true philosopher, she said. But let's be real. When was the last time you had to choose between rent and groceries, or worry about your kid getting decent health care? Whoopi raised her eyebrows. Sarah sat up straighter. Sunny looked over at Joy, a flicker of concern crossing her face. Joy wasn't asking a question anymore. She was laying a trap. And Keanu knew it. Keanu didn't respond right away. He sat back in his chair, his posture relaxed, but his gaze sharper now. The question hadn't caught him off guard, but the sudden escalation had. This wasn't political curiosity. It was personal, targeted, and public. I think, Keanu said finally, that everyone's struggle matters, whether you're famous or unknown, whether you're working 3 jobs or building sets on a film. I don't compare one hardship to another, but I do know loss. I do know loneliness. And I know what it feels like to walk through a storm you didn't ask for. The audience fell quiet. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. It should have been the end of that thread. But Joy wasn't done. She leaned in again, her voice more pointed now. Well, some people think celebrities like you talk about kindness while cashing massive checks and calling it virtue. Do you really believe it's possible to be wealthy and still relate to real people? Keanu looked down for a beat, then back up. Yes, if you don't forget where you came from, if you remember the names of the people around you, if you understand that money doesn't erase pain or make you immune to loss. Joy smiled tightly. How poetic. Sarah Haynes tried to jump in with a quick redirect. Let's talk about the training for John Wick 4, because I heard there's a scene. But Joy spoke over her. No, I think this is worth digging into. After all, the public image is that Keanu Reeves is the humble millionaire, right? The guy who eats lunch on a park bench, takes the subway, gives away money. But what if all of that is just branding? Marcus, backstage, stood up from his chair in the green room. He paced in small circles, muttering to himself. She's going there. She's actually going there. Keanu didn't flinch. It's not branding. I've just always believed that you don't need to be loud to be kind, or rich to be generous. Joy crossed her arms, her tone now openly confrontational. And yet somehow, every nice thing you do ends up in the press. Isn't that a little convenient? The studio audience murmured. A few people exchanged uncomfortable glances. Someone coughed in the back row. The warm applause from earlier was a distant memory. Keanu inhaled slowly, holding the breath for a moment before releasing it. I don't control what gets published. I don't have a team leaking stories. If it were up to me, most of what I do for others would never be talked about. That's not why I do it. Joy's eyes locked on his. But you benefit from it. Whoopi looked at her, clearly startled. Joy. But Keanu raised a hand gently, signaling he would respond. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself with anger. He simply said, "Maybe, but that doesn't make the kindness less real." Joy leaned back again, satisfied. For now. The temperature on set had changed. The smile on her face didn't match the tension in her voice. And for the first time, Keanu realized he hadn't walked onto a stage. He'd walked into a slow-burning ambush. The mood in the studio was shifting by the second. Keanu had just finished answering a question about his training regimen for John Wick 4, adding a moment of levity by joking about the bruises he picked up during rehearsals. The audience chuckled. Even Whoopi and Sarah smiled. But Joy Behar didn't laugh. She sat still, flipping a note card over in her hand like she was waiting for her cue. Her expression tightened into something calculated, and then she struck. "So, Keanu," she said, her voice unnaturally crisp, "you mentioned kindness a few times this morning. You've talked about respect, about remembering where you came from. But let me ask you something real. Do you think actors like you live in a bubble of privilege?" The laughter stopped instantly. The studio fell into a heavy silence, the kind that no camera or stage light could soften. Even the crew behind the scenes paused in their movement. Keanu turned toward Joy. The light from the overhead rig bounced off his face, catching the stillness in his eyes. He wasn't rattled, yet, but he knew this was a pivot, and not a smooth one. He nodded once before responding. "I think anyone who's had success can run the risk of becoming disconnected," he said slowly, carefully. "That's why it matters how you treat people, not just your peers, but the ones whose names you don't know. I don't think money has to make you blind." Joy's lips pressed into a smile, but it didn't touch her eyes. "And yet," she continued, "you do ride the subway, right? You've been photographed eating sandwiches alone on park benches. You've given away money and motorcycles. That's all very convenient for someone building a man-of-the-people image, don't you think?" The words hung in the air like a dare. Marcus, still backstage, lowered his head into his hands. Keanu blinked slowly, then leaned in, elbows resting gently on the arms of the chair. His voice stayed level, unshaken. "I don't think of it as an image. I take the subway because it's faster than traffic. I eat on benches because I get hungry, and I give because it feels right. I'm not trying to impress anyone." Joy tilted her head. "No PR team involved in those decisions?" Keanu didn't flinch. "No." "Well, isn't that nice?" she said, her voice turning icy. "A humble millionaire with a private foundation, mysterious donations, and a permanent smile. You've practically rewritten the celebrity playbook." Sarah glanced at Sonny. Sonny didn't look back. Keanu could feel the air thinning again. This wasn't skepticism, it was dismissal. She wasn't probing his answers, she was dismantling his character in slow motion. Live, on air. Still, he kept his tone respectful. "If that's how it comes across, I can't control that. But the truth doesn't need to be loud. I'm not trying to be a playbook." The corners of Joy's mouth lifted slightly. "No, of course not. You're just playing the role of the Hollywood saint." The words Hollywood saint echoed through the studio louder than the microphone could carry them. The phrase didn't just land, it cut. The audience began to shift in their seats. A low wave of discomfort moved across the room, quiet but unmistakable. A few people glanced around, as if looking for a cue that this was still supposed to be entertainment. Keanu didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his hands for a second, then back up at Joy. The kindness in his expression didn't vanish, but something behind it had changed. He wasn't smiling now, not out of offense, out of clarity. The conversation had just crossed from curious into cruel. "I've never called myself anything like that," Keanu said evenly. "I've made mistakes. I've had regrets. I don't walk around thinking I'm better than anyone. But if I've helped someone, even once, that's enough for me." Joy leaned forward again, her voice thick with sarcasm. "Oh, come on, Keanu, let's be honest. That whole sad sandwich on the bench photo? That went viral in what, an hour? And suddenly the whole world believes you're the quiet philosopher of Hollywood. That didn't help your image at all, did it?" To put it, Keanu's eyes stayed on her. He could have looked at the cameras, at the crowd, at the other hosts, but he didn't. He stayed right there, unmoved. "I didn't know anyone was taking that photo," he replied. "I was on my lunch break." "Right," Joy said with a smirk. "And the guy who posted it just happened to work for an agency, right?" "Is this a trial?" Whoopi interrupted sharply, trying to pull the moment back. "Joy, come on. This was supposed to be a light segment." Joy waved her off. "No, I think it's fair. We praise these people like they're gods when they drop a $20 bill or talk softly about grief, but no one asks them to explain how they keep benefiting from being everyone's favorite wounded hero." Sunny shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Sarah quietly picked up her mug, trying to avoid eye contact. Keanu didn't move. His voice was calm but firmer now. "I'm not asking for praise, and I don't expect it. I just try to show up where I'm needed. Sometimes that's in a film, sometimes it's with a crew member, and sometimes it's in silence, where no one's watching." There was a brief pause, the kind of pause that comes before the next blow. Joy gave a thin smile. "But that's the thing, isn't it? Someone always ends up watching." The lights above the stage flickered slightly as a tech adjusted the rig. The audience remained quiet. Everyone could feel it now. Something was happening. The tone of the interview had broken through its surface. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a test. And Keanu, whether he liked it or not, had just been placed on trial in front of millions. Keanu's hands rested calmly on his lap. His shoulders didn't tense. His breathing stayed steady. But his silence spoke volumes. He looked directly at Joy Behar. Not with anger, but with something more unsettling for her. Unshaken clarity. "I don't need people to watch me," he said, slowly and deliberately. "I just need to know I didn't walk past someone in pain and pretend not to see them." The audience stirred again, a few nods visible from the front rows, but Joy wasn't finished. "No one's questioning your heart, Keanu," she said with mock sympathy. "We're just wondering, why the constant spectacle of humility? Why the endless need to prove you're one of us when we all know you're not?" Keanu blinked once, then leaned slightly forward. "I've never claimed to be one of anyone. I don't pretend to understand what every person goes through, but I know what it means to lose. I know what it means to feel alone, and I don't have to be poor to care about people who are." Joy let out a short, dry laugh. "So now you're the suffering millionaire? With a deep, poetic backstory? That's convenient. For a man who gives so much away, you seem to keep getting more famous for it." There was a flicker in the crowd. Whispers, shifting bodies, furrowed brows. Some looked down at their phones. A few began recording, sensing this was no longer just an interview. It was unraveling. Sarah Haynes finally spoke, her voice quieter than usual. "Joy, maybe we can..." But Joy cut her off without breaking her gaze from Keanu. "Don't worry, Sarah. He can handle it. After all, he's got the whole world rooting for him. The saint of sadness. The lonely subway messiah." Keanu's face didn't move, but his eyes narrowed slightly. It was the first physical sign that something inside him had shifted. He took a breath, then exhaled through his nose. "I never asked for that image," he said, his voice still calm. "I didn't invent it. I don't feed it. People see what they want to see." Joy tilted her head. "And what do you want them to see?" "I want them to see someone who listens," he said, "who doesn't always have the answers, who doesn't walk through life thinking every moment needs to be a performance." Joy leaned back in her chair, but her eyes stayed locked on his. Well, that's the funny thing about performances, Keanu. Sometimes the best ones are the quietest. A chill moved through the studio. It wasn't from the air conditioning. It was the realization that Joy Behar wasn't just criticizing his public image anymore. She was daring him to break. But Keanu didn't break. Not yet. He sat perfectly still in his chair, eyes focused, posture composed, while around him the tone of the interview curdled into something sharper, colder, and far more dangerous. The first strike had been delivered, and the next would go even deeper. Joy Behar's fingers slid across the table as she reached for a stack of note cards sitting just outside camera frame. The move was subtle, practiced, but Keanu noticed it immediately. These weren't spontaneous questions anymore. This was choreography, planned, rehearsed, and timed to strike when the tension had reached its peak. She glanced down at the top card, then looked back up with a practiced smirk. "Let's talk about something that really caught headlines a while back," she said. "I'm sure you remember the story. About you donating tens of millions from your Matrix earnings to the special effects and costume departments. Very noble, very heartwarming." Keanu nodded once, cautiously. "But here's what I find interesting," Joy continued, her voice gaining an edge. "For a man who values privacy, that story spread like wildfire. The exact dollar amounts, the departments involved, the percentage of profits, the timing, it was all very specific, almost like it was handed directly to the press." Keanu tilted his head slightly, puzzled. "I never released that information," he said. "That wasn't something I intended to be public. Someone on the team may have shared it, but it wasn't me." Joy gave a dry laugh and looked back at the card, then up again. "Of course not. Just another accidental leak that paints you as the most generous man in Hollywood. You have a lot of those." Whoopi shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Sunny glanced over with the same unease, her hand brushing the edge of her mug. Something about this didn't feel like a segment anymore. It felt like a setup, and everyone at the table, except Joy, seemed to realize it too late. Keanu's tone remained controlled. "I've always preferred to keep private matters private, especially when it comes to giving. That was never meant to be a headline." "But it became one," Joy said sharply. "And not just once. Over and over. You donate to crew members, you give motorcycles, you buy lunch for entire sets, and somehow, every one of those stories ends up on the front page. Funny how that works, isn't it?" Backstage, Marcus stood by the monitor, jaw tight, arms crossed. His voice dropped into a growl. "This isn't promotion. This is character assassination." The stage manager looked over but said nothing. The protocol was clear. Don't interrupt the show unless someone goes off air or crosses legal lines. And Joy hadn't crossed those lines yet. But she was close. Keanu's expression didn't change, but his silence deepened. Not the silence of someone with no answer. The silence of someone realizing they were never being asked a real question to begin with. Only baited. Only pushed. Joy wasn't trying to understand him. She was trying to unmake him, piece by piece, in front of a national audience. Joy tapped her note cards again, louder this time, as if each card contained a strike she was eager to deliver. Her voice sharpened. "Look, Keanu, you say you're not behind the publicity. Fine. Let's pretend for a moment that's true. But don't you think it's fair to ask why these stories always paint you in the most flattering light? Always the selfless giver? Always the loner with a golden heart? No flaws, no mistakes, just Keanu." Keanu lifted his eyes slowly, meeting her gaze. There was no anger in his expression, only disappointment, a quiet, measured kind. "You're welcome to ask anything you like," he said. "But I don't control what people write. I don't ask for praise, and I don't chase it." Joy raised an eyebrow. "And yet it seems to chase you." Sarah shifted in her chair again, trying to change the current. "Let's go back to John Wick 4. You worked with some new international stunt teams this time, right? But Joy ignored her. Or maybe, she pressed, this is just really smart image management. You let others leak the good stuff so you can play the reluctant hero, the guy who just happens to be caught giving away half his fortune. You know what that sounds like to me? Calculated. The word landed like a slap. Keanu's jaw tightened slightly, though he remained composed. I don't think being kind should be viewed with suspicion, he said. But I understand that some people do. Whoopi looked over at Joy with an expression that was part confusion, part disbelief. Joy, I think we're veering pretty far from where we started. Joy waved her off again, her eyes still locked on Keanu. No, I think this is exactly where we need to be. People put celebrities like him on pedestals and never ask how they got there. Well, today, I'm asking. Sonny leaned forward more gently. But Joy, there's a difference between honest questions and turning someone's personal generosity into an attack, especially when that generosity has helped thousands of people. Joy shot her a look. I'm not attacking his generosity. I'm questioning the story around it. We've been sold a narrative. I just want to know if he believes it. Keanu's voice was lower now, but clearer. I don't see people as narratives. I see them as human beings, with burdens, with hopes, with heartbreak. I try to be kind, not because I want to be seen as kind, but because it costs nothing, and sometimes it's the only thing that helps. The audience stirred again. There were murmurs, a few claps. Some viewers, it seemed, were siding with Keanu. Others were simply trying to make sense of what they were watching. Joy smirked slightly. And yet somehow, kindness has become your brand. Convenient. For the first time since he'd stepped onto that stage, Keanu's eyes narrowed. Not with hostility, but with recognition. He saw the trap now, and it was closing. Keanu leaned slightly forward, not to confront, but to be precise. His voice, still even, carried the weight of someone who'd walked through fire more than once. If being kind makes people uncomfortable, I can live with that. But it shouldn't make them suspicious. Joy raised her chin. What makes people suspicious is when kindness becomes performance, when generosity always ends up in headlines, when you're praised for humility more than others are for achievement. That's when people start asking questions. Keanu didn't blink. Then ask better questions. The line was quiet, no emphasis, no aggression, but it landed like a hammer. The audience reacted instantly. Small gasps, a few surprised laughs, even a murmur of agreement rippling through the room. Joy's expression faltered for just a second, as if she hadn't expected him to push back, even in the gentlest way. Whoopi folded her arms across her chest and turned toward Joy. This was supposed to be a segment about a film, Joy, not an interrogation. Joy snapped back. I'm just doing what nobody else will. Someone has to look past the image. Keanu looked down for a breath, then met her eyes again. You're not looking past anything. You're building a narrative of your own and trying to stuff me inside it. Sonny nodded slowly. He's right. Sarah added, it feels less like a conversation and more like, well, like something else entirely. Joy rolled her eyes. Please. You all eat this stuff up, the subway photos, the viral clips, the motorcycle donations. It's media candy, and he plays right into it. Keanu's hands were clasped loosely in his lap. I don't control what goes viral. I just try to live in a way I won't regret later. Joy shook her head. And yet here we are, talking about your image again. You didn't even have to bring it up. It brings itself up. Backstage, Marcus stepped away from the monitor, pacing in a tight circle with his phone to his ear. This is a setup, total ambush. She's not interviewing him. She's trying to deconstruct him live. In the studio, the atmosphere thickened. The crowd, once cheerful, now felt split, divided between discomfort and disbelief. Some looked angry. Others seemed captivated by the tension. Keanu sat tall, unwavering. Do you think kindness should be private, or should it be public? Joy blinked. What? He repeated, should kindness be invisible to be real? Joy didn't answer. Keanu continued, voice steady. Because I've done both. Quiet things no one will ever hear about. Loud things that somehow found their way into headlines. But none of that should change the intention. If someone's hungry, I feed them. If someone's hurting, I help them. That's not branding. That's being human. Joy didn't smile this time. She stared at him, cards in her hand, but no lines left to read. She had played her strategy, and Keanu had not only withstood it, he had exposed it. Joy Behar adjusted her cards again, but now it was more of a signal than a necessity. The audience could feel it. She wasn't easing up, she was doubling down. The last few minutes had shown Keanu wouldn't break under direct pressure, so she pivoted, shifting the angle of her attack. All right, Joy said, voice rising just enough to cut through the lingering silence. Let's talk about something a little more personal. Your background. You've been very open in interviews about the struggles you faced early in your career. Odd jobs, sleeping in cars, bouncing between cheap motels. But don't you think there's been a bit of exaggeration? Keanu's eyes locked on hers. What do you mean? Joy gave a small shrug. Come on, Keanu, there are millions of Americans who've grown up with nothing, who've lost homes, who've worked 2 or 3 jobs just to survive. And yet you, coming from a decent middle-class family in Toronto, love to talk about how hard those early years were. It starts to sound like you're trying to manufacture suffering, romanticize your journey to make yourself more relatable. That line hit hard. It wasn't just dismissive, it was loaded. She wasn't just questioning his story. She was accusing him of crafting a fiction, a character, a calculated persona made up of selective truths. Keanu's voice was quiet but steady. There's nothing romantic about those years. Then why do you keep bringing them up? Joy shot back. In interviews, in features, in profiles, it's always, I slept in my car. I worked in a restaurant. I didn't know where my next paycheck would come from. Sounds a little too on the nose, don't you think? He looked down for a moment, not because he was unsure, but because he was choosing his words with precision. I talk about those things, he said, because they were real, because they shaped how I see people, because I know what it's like to feel invisible in a crowded city. I never claimed I was suffering more than anyone else. I never claimed my path was the hardest, but it was mine, and it mattered. Joy leaned back in her chair. You just make it sound so poetic, like a script, like you're still acting. A low murmur spread through the audience. Several people shifted in their seats. A woman in the 3rd row shook her head slowly. Another man folded his arms, clearly uncomfortable. Sarah looked down at the table. Sunny opened her mouth, then closed it again. Whoopi narrowed her eyes at Joy, then turned to Keanu. I remember one of those interviews you did, she said softly. You said those nights alone in those little rooms taught you to appreciate silence. That stuck with me. Keanu gave a gentle nod. Because silence can tell you who you are. He paused, then looked back at Joy. But I never said it was beautiful. I never said it was something I'd want anyone else to go through. Joy folded her hands. You sure make it sound noble. Keanu's voice didn't rise, but it grew firmer. I was lonely. I was scared. I was broke. There was nothing noble about it. Joy didn't back down. She pressed her fingers together, staring across the table like she was trying to hold him under a microscope. But you use it, don't you? You bring it up so people see you differently. So you're not just a famous actor, but a survivor. So you can relate to the rest of us. That's what sells the nice guy story. That's what keeps the legend alive. Keanu inhaled through his nose. Calm. Controlled. But his tone now had a noticeable edge beneath its stillness. If I've ever talked about the past, It's not because I want to be admired. It's because I don't want to forget who I was before all this, and because there are people who are still living in that place right now." Joy smirked. "So, you're their voice?" "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "I'm not trying to speak for anyone. I can only speak to what I know. And what I know is, when you're 21, sleeping in a car, trying to get through a day without losing hope, you don't think about image, you think about surviving." The audience reacted, more audible this time, a few scattered claps, more heads nodding. The tension that had been building slowly was beginning to turn. But Joy wasn't done. "You talk about sleeping in cars and odd jobs like they were battles, but you always had a choice. You could have gone home. You weren't trapped. That's not the same as the people who can't leave the street." Keanu didn't answer immediately. He looked down for a beat, not out of shame but restraint. "I never said it was the same," he replied. "I've never pretended to understand the depth of every kind of suffering. I didn't grow up on the street. I didn't grow up in war. But I grew up with absence, with silence where a father should have been, with fear I didn't always have words for." His voice remained steady, but the room felt like it was holding its breath. "I took jobs because I had to. I stayed in cheap places because I had nowhere else to go. I wasn't building character. I was trying not to fall apart." That last sentence struck the air hard. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rehearsed. Is just true. Sarah glanced at Sunny again, her face full of something unspoken. Sympathy, maybe. Or recognition. And somewhere backstage, Marcus leaned in toward the studio monitor, muttering, "They need to cut to commercial. This is getting ugly." Joy sat back, but her expression remained tight. "It's all very moving," she said. "But you've built a career out of being that guy, the quiet sufferer, the humble outsider. And I think we all need to start asking whether it's really true, or just a role you never stopped playing." A woman in the audience muttered, "That's not fair," loud enough to be picked up by one of the side mics. Others nodded, and the room began to tilt. Against Joy, Keanu took a slow breath. He could feel the temperature in the room, the unspoken questions hanging over the audience like a low cloud, but his eyes never left Joy's. "You're right about one thing," he said. "I did have choices. I had more than some people ever get, and I don't pretend otherwise. But pain isn't a contest, and humility isn't a costume." Joy opened her mouth, but Keanu continued, "I have never claimed to be something I'm not. I didn't grow up in extreme poverty. I didn't live on the streets. But I did grow up feeling alone. My father left when I was a child. I moved around constantly. I struggled with dyslexia. I lost people. I worked jobs I hated, and every time I got close to something stable, something cracked underneath it." His voice stayed low, but there was strength in every syllable. "So no," he said, "I don't romanticize those years. I survived them. I endured them. And they taught me to treat others with care, because you never know who's barely holding on." The studio went quiet, not dead silence, but a thick stillness, the kind that comes when the truth has finally been spoken, and there's nothing left to add. People in the audience looked moved. Some leaned forward. Others glanced at Joy like they couldn't believe how far she had gone. Joy, for once, didn't speak. But the pause didn't last. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms, then said with a sharp edge, "You do realize how rehearsed all that sounds, right?" A collective gasp came from the front row. Even Whoopi raised her eyebrows, stunned. Sarah looked away entirely, and Sunny, who had been holding her silence, finally spoke up. "Joy, seriously?" Joy didn't respond, but Keanu did. "I didn't rehearse anything," he said. "You asked about my life, I gave you the truth. You don't have to like it. You don't even have to believe it. But you don't get to rewrite it." Joy gave a short, bitter laugh. "You're very composed for someone under fire." Keanu didn't smile. That's because I've been under fire before, and I've learned not to mistake hostility for honesty. The audience clapped, louder now, a small ripple at first, but it grew. A few people stood, not in protest, in respect. Joy looked out at the crowd, then back at Keanu. She'd meant to expose something, but now she was the one being seen. The courtroom she had tried to build around Keanu was collapsing, and she was left standing in it, alone. The moment lingered, tense, silent, real. And somewhere in that silence, the audience stopped seeing Keanu Reeves as a celebrity. They saw him as a man who had been tested and refused to break. The air hadn't settled from the last exchange when Joy leaned forward again, flipping through a few papers on her lap like she was holding on to something sharp. Her voice returned, but it had lost its earlier sarcasm. Now it carried a colder bite. "I've been looking into your charitable foundation, Keanu," she said, "the one that claims to support children's hospitals and cancer research." Keanu straightened in his chair. Joy continued, her tone laced with implication. "According to the last publicly available reports, though there aren't many, it seems a large percentage of the money goes toward operational costs. Salaries, administrative fees, travel. I have to wonder how much of those donations actually reach the people you say you're helping." A hush fell over the studio. Keanu blinked slowly, then answered with quiet restraint. "The foundation is privately funded. I don't raise money publicly. I don't put out ads or campaigns. It's something I support out of my own pocket. And yes, it has operating costs, just like every nonprofit. But the majority of funds go directly to services. We're independently audited every year." Joy raised her voice slightly. "That's convenient, but I'm not sure the numbers agree." Keanu looked visibly shaken. He glanced at the audience, many of whom had begun to frown or shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Are you accusing me of stealing from children?" he asked, softly but firmly. Joy scoffed. "Don't twist it. I'm saying the Hollywood elite often hide behind charitable fronts. It's a pattern. You build a saintly image, people stop asking questions. That's how this game works, right?" Sonny's eyes widened. "Joy, that's enough." Joy waved her off. "No, let's not tiptoe. He's here to talk about truth, right? Then let's talk about it." Keanu's hands clenched into fists on his knees. He didn't speak right away. He swallowed once, then again. The tension in his shoulders was unmistakable. "I didn't build the foundation for press," he finally said, his voice quieter than before. "I built it because my sister almost died of leukemia. I know what it's like to sit in a hospital and watch someone you love fade away. If I can make that easier for someone else, even a little, I will." There was a pause. But Joy didn't let it breathe. "And we're just supposed to take your word for that?" From somewhere in the front row, someone murmured too loudly to be ignored, "He's done more than you ever have." Phones were coming out now, screens lit up around the studio. Whispered comments rippled through the seats. Backstage, Marcus stood with his headset tilted off one ear, watching the feed, his jaw tight. He turned to a crew member. "This isn't journalism, it's a setup." On stage, Keanu sat still, but something had shifted in his expression. He wasn't just defending his character anymore. He was defending something sacred, something personal, something Joy hadn't expected to hit. Keanu leaned slightly forward, no longer retreating. His voice stayed even, but something had settled in his eyes, a steadiness that made the audience sit straighter. "I don't publicize my donations," he said. "I never have. People only know about the foundation because someone leaked the paperwork years ago. I didn't announce it, I didn't put my name on it, and I certainly didn't start it for applause." Joy tilted her head. "So what you're saying is, you're just a silent hero? How convenient." A ripple of murmurs moved across the audience. Some shook their heads. A few people in the front row exchanged glances. The energy was shifting, and not in Joy's favor. Keanu drew a slow breath and didn't respond to the bait. Instead, he continued, "The kids we support, they don't care who's on TV. They care that they're not alone in a room with chemo drips and shaved heads. They care that someone, anyone, remembers they exist." Joy looked unimpressed. "I've read the reports, Keanu. Less than 60% of the funds go directly to patient care." "That's inaccurate," Keanu said flatly. "You're quoting a summary from a third-party blog that's never seen our audit, and I'm not going to drag our board of directors or our medical partners into this show to win an argument." Sonny leaned forward. "Joy, can I just say?" Joy shut her down again. "Sonny, you can say it during the next segment." There was a flash of disappointment in Sonny's eyes. Whoopi folded her arms but didn't interrupt. Sarah looked down at her notes, visibly uncomfortable. Keanu's jaw flexed. "I don't have a PR team managing my donations. I don't have handlers shaping a narrative. You can call me whatever you want, but don't call the people we've helped a publicity stunt." Joy narrowed her eyes. "So, everything you do is just pure?" "No," he replied. "Nothing I do is pure. I'm a flawed man trying to do good things where I can. That's it." The honesty in his words lingered in the air. For the first time, Joy seemed momentarily stalled, not convinced, but no longer holding the upper hand. But she recovered quickly. "Well, you certainly sound rehearsed," she said, lips curled. The audience gasped. Keanu blinked, not from hurt, but from disbelief. "That's what you took from that?" he asked. "That I rehearsed?" Joy didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence was louder than anything she could have said. From the corner of the stage, a camera operator subtly zoomed in on Keanu's face, catching the faint twitch of muscle beneath his left eye. Not anger, not outrage. Just restraint. The kind that comes from years of trying not to raise your voice even when you're being torn down. The kind that says, "I've been here before. I won't break for you." A woman in the second row suddenly stood up, visibly upset. Her voice cut through the silence. "My daughter survived leukemia because of a grant from Keanu's foundation. You have no idea what that meant to us." The studio froze. Security moved discreetly toward the edge of the audience, unsure if this was planned. It wasn't. Joy looked startled. "Ma'am, we're not taking audience questions right now." The woman held up her phone. "I'm not asking a question. I'm telling the truth. People like him saved my kid's life when we couldn't afford the treatments. Maybe do your research before throwing accusations on national TV." Applause erupted. Spontaneous. Raw. Keanu turned toward the woman and nodded. Just once. No words. But his eyes softened for the first time in minutes. Joy, visibly rattled, tried to redirect. "Okay, we appreciate passion, but let's keep it professional. This is a discussion, not a courtroom." "Feels like one," Whoopi muttered. Sarah interjected, finally finding her voice. "It's starting to feel like an ambush, actually." Joy ignored her. She looked back at Keanu, forcing a laugh. "Look, no one's saying you're evil, but the image of Saint Keanu? Perfect, generous, humble. It's just too polished to be real. Isn't it?" Keanu didn't flinch. "That image isn't mine. It was built without my permission. If you strip it away, what's left is just a guy who's made a lot of mistakes, lost people he loved, and decided that if he was going to stay alive, he might as well try to do something good." Another pause. Then, gently, he added, "You don't have to believe me. Just don't insult the people who benefited from what we've done." Joy opened her mouth to reply, but a voice in her earpiece told her they were over time for the segment. She looked down, then back at the camera, trying to regain control. "Well, that was spirited." The audience didn't laugh. As they cut to commercial, the floor director shouted, "And we're clear!" The moment the lights dimmed slightly, Keanu stood. He didn't storm off. He didn't slam anything. He just stood and walked toward the woman in the second row. She was already crying. Keanu crouched beside her, took her hand and whispered something no one could hear. The woman nodded through tears. Her husband beside her, holding their daughter's old hospital ID bracelet, looked stunned. Joy stayed frozen in her chair. Sunny turned away, disgusted. Whoopi stood up, slowly removing her mic. Sarah looked like she'd witnessed something shift. Backstage, Marcus's fists were still clenched. "That wasn't an interview," he said through gritted teeth. "That was a setup, and they just made the worst mistake of their lives." But in the middle of it all, Keanu remained quiet, still kneeling, still listening. And the woman's voice echoed in the air long after the cameras stopped rolling. "You saved my daughter?" And no smear campaign in the world could take that away. The commercial break ended with a forced smile from Joy, her lips pressed together, her voice a tone too bright to feel real. "We're back, with Keanu Reeves, who's certainly stirring the pot this morning," she announced. The audience was tense. There were no cheers this time, no polite laughter, just tight expressions, side glances, and phone screens glowing with live tweets. Keanu had returned to his seat but remained quiet. His eyes were no longer soft. They were locked, still, heavy. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed, clearly not enjoying where this was heading. Sunny looked furious. Sarah wouldn't even meet Joy's eyes. Joy straightened her note cards with a practiced flick, then looked up. "You know, Keanu," she began, her voice shifting into something colder, more clinical, "you've built quite a narrative around your tragedies. Your father, your friend River Phoenix, the accident, the loss of your child. It almost feels like there's a pattern." The room stopped breathing. Keanu blinked. Just once. His hands froze in his lap. Sunny's mouth fell open. Whoopi's eyebrows shot up. Sarah gasped audibly. Joy went on. "Now, I'm not saying you haven't been through pain, but don't you think, just maybe, you've leaned into those losses a bit too much? As part of your brand?" Whoopi slammed her hand on the table. "That's enough, Joy?" Joy turned, startled. "What?" I said, "That's enough. You don't go there." But Joy didn't stop. She pushed forward, clearly caught in the high of her own momentum. "Come on, Whoopi. We're allowed to ask hard questions. It's public knowledge. I mean, Ava, your daughter, that loss is heartbreaking, yes. But hasn't it also become part of this aura around you? The silent grief, the mystery? It draws people in." And then it happened. Keanu's body didn't move, but his voice did. Low, sharp, unshakable. "You will not talk about my daughter." No one said a word. Not a breath was heard in the studio. Joy opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Keanu continued, his voice calm but laced with something dangerous beneath the surface. "You can question my choices, you can doubt my career, but you don't get to touch the memory of my child." His eyes didn't blink, his posture didn't change, but everything about him felt massive. Final. Sunny was shaking her head, whispering, "No, no," under her breath. Sarah put a hand to her mouth. Whoopi leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "You owe him an apology. Right now." Joy looked around, confused, as if she had crossed some invisible line and only just realized she couldn't go back. "I didn't mean to." Keanu cut her off. "You did." And then he stood up. Not with a shout, not with fanfare, just a slow, deliberate rise. The camera didn't follow him. It stayed fixed on the women at the table as he walked off screen. The silence in the studio was so thick it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. Sarah whispered, "Did she really say that?" Sunny responded quietly, "She did." Offstage, there was a flurry of movement. Marcus rushing toward the side, producers scrambling, someone yelling to cut the feed early. But it didn't matter. Because in that moment, every person watching at home, every person in the studio, and every co-host sitting at that table knew the line had been crossed, and the cost of it would not be forgotten. Marcus caught up to Keanu in the hallway just beyond the curtain. The cameras had cut to emergency filler footage, something generic with soft music, but the damage was done. The fire had already started. Keanu stopped walking. He didn't slam a door. He didn't yell. He just stood there, shoulders tight, head lowered slightly. Marcus gently placed a hand on his back. "He brought up Ava," Marcus said, his voice low, steady. No one expected that. Keanu didn't speak, but Marcus could see it. The breath held too long, the clenched jaw, the restraint that came not from weakness, but from pain so deep it couldn't find words. Back on the stage, the silence remained unbroken. Whoopi leaned forward and spoke directly to the camera. "We're going to take a moment, folks," she said, calm but firm. "Sometimes things are said that cross a line. That happened today, and I want to be very clear. This show does not support exploiting personal tragedy for entertainment." Joy sat frozen. Her face, which had moments earlier been alive with energy, now looked pale. She fidgeted with her pen, then looked to Sunny. "Am I really the only one who sees what's going on?" Joy asked, half defensive, half pleading. Sunny stared at her. "You questioned the grief of a man who buried his daughter? That's not journalism, that's cruelty." The audience erupted into quiet applause. Not the usual clapping at a funny joke or a clever line. This was slow, deliberate, a statement in itself. Backstage, Keanu finally turned. "I'm okay," he said, "but I'm not going back out there." Marcus nodded. "You don't have to." Keanu walked over to a side table and poured a glass of water. His hands were shaking slightly. He took a sip, then looked out toward the hallway that led to the exit. "She didn't just question me," he said. "She made my daughter a prop." "He's not a prop," Marcus replied. "And no one who's ever lost someone they love would think that for a second." Keanu nodded. "I think I've said everything I need to." Back inside the studio, Whoopi and Sunny were trying to shift the show toward a close, but social media had already exploded. Hashtags like "Stand with Keanu" and "Fire Joy" were trending within minutes. Clips of the moment, Joy's words, Keanu's quiet defense, the way he walked off, were already being shared by the thousands. Some viewers cried watching it. Others were furious. Many, especially parents who had experienced loss, posted long emotional threads about what Keanu's stand meant to them. But no one could ignore the weight of what had just happened. Joy Behar, known for her provocative questions and sharp tongue, had finally gone too far. And it wasn't a Hollywood scandal that stopped her. It wasn't ratings. It wasn't another celebrity yelling. It was the quiet voice of a grieving father. One sentence, one truth. "You will not talk about my daughter." It echoed through the studio, through every living room screen, through every news headline. Because in a world used to drama, shouting, and spectacle, sometimes the loudest statement is made with calm, unwavering dignity. And that day, Keanu Reeves said more by standing up and walking away than any monologue could have ever delivered. The air had never felt heavier on that set. For a moment, the audience sat in stunned silence, some with their mouths slightly open, others shifting in their seats as if unsure what would happen next. Joy glanced at the cameras, then toward the production booth, then at her fellow co-hosts, but no one came to her rescue. The set, usually bustling with controlled chaos, had frozen around her. Then, slowly, deliberately, Keanu stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't fume. He didn't wave his hands or throw down a tantrum. He simply rose. His hand went to the microphone clipped neatly to the collar of his black shirt. He unclipped it in one smooth motion and set it gently on the glass table in front of him. The sound of it being placed down echoed, unnaturally loud, and someone in the front row gasped. Keanu didn't glance at the audience. He didn't even acknowledge the cameras. He just looked straight at Joy. his eyes steady and unblinking. "You took the worst pain of my life," he said quietly, and turned it into television entertainment. The words cut sharper than any shout could have. His voice didn't shake. It didn't tremble, but the weight in it was unmistakable, raw, personal, restrained not because it lacked emotion, but because the emotion was too deep to spill in front of strangers. Joy opened her mouth, trying to recover. "Keanu, come on, I didn't mean." He raised a hand. Just one small motion, but it silenced her mid-sentence. "This isn't about what you meant," he said. "It's about what you did." Joy tried to smile, but her face twitched. Okay, let's not get too dramatic here. I'm just doing my job." Sunny leaned forward slightly, her mouth opening but stopped herself. This wasn't her moment. It wasn't anyone's. It belonged to the man standing with quiet power in the middle of the room. "I buried my daughter," Keanu said. "Her name was Ava. She never got to take her first breath outside the womb. I held her in my hands, and I buried her before I ever got to see her eyes open." A few people in the audience were now weeping openly. "I never asked for sympathy," he continued. "I never marketed my grief. I never monetized my sorrow. But you," he looked directly at Joy again, "you saw it as content." Joy opened her mouth again, and this time her voice cracked. "You don't understand. That wasn't—" "No," Keanu interrupted. "You don't understand." He stepped back from the table, leaving his mic behind. He didn't need amplification anymore. His voice filled the room, not in volume, but in gravity. "You can question my acting. You can mock my success. You can call me overrated or awkward or boring. That's fine. I've lived with that my whole life. But when you took the memory of my daughter and twisted it into something to get ratings, you crossed into something you don't deserve to speak about." The audience gave a collective inhale, the kind that comes before either a collapse or a storm. Keanu looked around, then slowly back to Joy. "You used her," he said, his voice even lower now. "And you don't even know her name." Joy lowered her eyes. "You don't know anything about her. You don't know the silence that filled the hospital room. You don't know the days I couldn't eat, the nights I couldn't sleep, the way I blamed myself for something I couldn't control. You don't know the years I spent in therapy just trying to breathe again. You don't know any of that, but you made it a segment." There was no applause, not yet, just stillness. Stillness and a heavy awareness that something irreversible had just occurred. Keanu exhaled slowly, the muscles in his jaw tightening. He didn't glare. He didn't smirk. He just stood still, anchored in something far deeper than anger, something closer to grief, reclaimed. "Pain doesn't give anyone permission to make others suffer," he said, "and privilege doesn't give anyone permission to exploit that pain." Whoopi leaned forward now, her voice barely above a whisper. "Keanu." He turned slightly toward her and nodded. "You've always been respectful. Thank you." Joy tried again, softer this time. "Keanu, I didn't mean for it to come out that way. It was a misstep." He looked at her, not with hatred, but with a clarity that cut deeper. "It wasn't a misstep. It was a choice. You knew what you were doing. You were just hoping I wouldn't say anything." A beat passed. Keanu's voice remained even, but there was a finality in it now. "You're used to people laughing it off. You're used to guests playing along, pretending they're not wounded. But I'm not here to entertain you at the cost of my humanity." Someone in the audience stood up and clapped once. It was awkward, unsure, but it sparked something. A ripple spread. Others stood. Applause followed, not wild, not performative, but solemn. A standing ovation rooted not in fandom, but in respect. Keanu didn't react to the applause. He wasn't performing. He had nothing to sell. "I came here today because I was invited," he said. not to promote anything, not to win over an audience. I came because I still believe in conversation, even hard ones. But this wasn't conversation. It was theater, a trap. And I won't be part of that. Joy swallowed hard. You're walking out? He nodded. Yes, because some lines, once crossed, have to be met with silence. I owe that to my daughter. With those words, he turned and walked calmly off the stage. No dramatic exit, no security, no shouting, just silence, broken only by the sound of his boots on the floor and the stunned stillness that followed in his wake. Joy remained seated, her hands folded tensely in her lap, staring ahead like she wasn't sure if the cameras were still rolling. The co-hosts looked at each other, visibly shaken. Sunny wiped at her eyes. Whoopi sat with her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a tight line. The applause didn't stop until Keanu had vanished behind the stage curtain. Backstage, a few crew members tried to approach him, but he held up a hand kindly. I just need a moment. He disappeared into a quiet hallway, away from the noise, away from the lights, away from the set that had turned into something toxic and irredeemable. He didn't storm out. He didn't slam the door. But his absence felt louder than any shout could have. Back in the studio, the cameras were still rolling. Joy finally turned to the audience. Well, I guess we'll be taking a break. It was the only thing she could think to say. But the damage had already been done, and Keanu had said everything that needed to be said. Keanu didn't go straight home. He stepped out the back exit of the studio into the cool afternoon air, the sky overcast, wind brushing softly against his face. He paused for a moment, breathing it in, letting it wash through him. There was no script left to follow, no handlers telling him what to say, no need to stay polite for the sake of reputation. He had said what he needed to say, but something inside him wasn't finished. Minutes later, he asked one of the producers for a handheld mic and walked quietly around the studio building. Not toward the stage, but toward the live audience waiting in the overflow lot, where some fans had gathered to watch the taping on an outdoor screen. They had seen everything, and they were waiting, uncertain, murmuring among themselves about what had just happened. Keanu stepped up to a small riser, took the mic, and looked out at them. Not as a celebrity, but as a man. The crowd slowly quieted. I didn't get a chance to speak to you, he said gently, so I'm doing it now. People turned. Phones came up. But he didn't flinch. I grew up without a father, Keanu said. He left when I was very young. I remember waiting by the window some days, thinking maybe he'd come back. He didn't. He shifted slightly, scanning the faces in front of him. I learned to stop expecting people to show up. That's a hard thing for a kid to carry. But it made me understand what it means to be present, what it means to sit with someone who's hurting. Not to fix it, just to be there. A woman in the front row clutched her chest. A man beside her lowered his head. They weren't fans right now. They were people, broken in different ways, like him. Keanu continued. There were years I slept on friends' couches. There were days I skipped meals to save for acting classes. There were roles I didn't get because I wasn't famous enough. And there were nights when I questioned whether anything I was doing really mattered. His voice didn't tremble yet, but it was close. And then came Ava, he said, pausing. The air changed. He looked down for a moment, then back up, eyes glassy but steady. She was my daughter. She never got to grow up. She never got to fall in love or take a breath outside the womb. But she existed. She existed in me, and she always will. Silence fell. Not even the breeze interrupted. I don't talk about her for sympathy, he added. And I don't mention my past for applause. I share it so maybe, just maybe, someone out there feels a little less alone. He stepped closer to the front edge of the riser now, no longer gripping the mic like a shield. There's this idea that being in pain makes you weak. or that if you speak about it, you're using it to manipulate others. But I've learned the opposite is true. Pain makes you open your eyes to the world around you. It makes you listen harder, love deeper, notice who's struggling and who's pretending not to. A young woman in the back let out a quiet sob. A few others wiped tears. I know what it's like to lose people. I've lost friends to overdoses, cancer, accidents. I've lost family to time. But what I've tried to hold on to is this one thing. Every person I meet is fighting their own battle. Every single one of you. He pressed his hand to his heart. And that means compassion has to come first. Keanu's voice lowered, but the weight behind it only grew. Some people, they mock that, he said. They twist it. They say he's using his pain to stay relevant, or he hides behind tragedy to win hearts. His jaw clenched for a second, then relaxed. But I'm not hiding behind anything. I'm standing in front of it, because if I don't, it owns me. And I refuse to let it define me in silence. He looked to his right and spotted a woman with a child in a stroller. The little boy was holding a small action figure, John Wick. His fingers wrapped tightly around it, as if it gave him courage. That's why I started the foundation. Not to build my image, but to build bridges, to fund cancer research, to help sick kids feel less afraid when they walk into a hospital room, to pay for therapy for grieving parents, to give people something to believe in again. His voice cracked there, and he didn't apologize for it. I've never cared about being the richest man in the room. I care about being the one who notices when someone's about to fall and reaches out before they hit the ground. The audience remained still, reverent. He took a moment before continuing. I don't expect Joy to understand that. Maybe she's never had to hold a hand at the edge of a hospital bed. Maybe she's never looked a mother in the eyes after she's lost a child. Maybe she thinks this is all about image and applause. He shook his head slowly. But you don't fake this. You don't manufacture loss. And you sure as hell don't get to weaponize it on national television. His tone was steady now, but cold. I didn't come here to be pitied. I didn't come here to argue. I came because I thought we were having a conversation. I came because I believe in kindness, even when it's not returned. He paused, scanning the crowd one last time. And if you remember one thing from this whole mess, let it be this. Grief doesn't make a person weak. It means they've loved deeply, and that is something worth honoring, not mocking. With that, he handed the mic to a nearby crew member and stepped off the platform. No music, no applause. Just silence. And the slow sound of people standing, not clapping, but placing hands on hearts. Because they understood. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. After the emotional weight of his words about Ava, the silence in the studio was thick. You could hear the faint hum of the lights above, the quiet shuffle of someone's shoe in the front row. Then, slowly, deliberately, Keanu reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out his phone. He held it up for a moment, as if deciding whether this step was necessary. Then he unlocked it, scrolled quickly, and turned the screen toward the audience. A web page loaded. It was the official homepage of his foundation. Right there on screen was a section titled Independent Audits. Anyone can request an audit, Keanu said quietly. It's always been public. Every expense, every dollar. There was a collective intake of breath. Joy Behar blinked, thrown off rhythm. Even Sunny tilted her head, peering at the screen, her eyebrows lifting. I never made a big deal out of it, Keanu added, because doing good shouldn't need a spotlight. But since we're here, he turned the phone around and tapped again. This time, he opened his email. And just so no one thinks this is staged, I'll send a copy of last year's financials to the show's producers right now. One more tap. Message sent. The audience erupted, not in applause, but murmurs of astonishment. A ripple moved through the rows. Phones came up. People whispered things like, "Did you see that?" And, "He's not playing games." Keanu glanced at Joy. You accused me of hiding behind charity, but the only thing I've ever hidden, he paused, is how much I give. He took a small breath. In the last 10 years, I've donated more than 70% of my earnings. Not through agents, not through brand deals. Quietly, anonymously, when I could. And I pay out of pocket to make sure it stays that way. Joy tried to interject, but how do we even know that? Keanu raised a gentle hand. The audit is public. You asked for proof. I gave it. Joy's mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time during the entire broadcast, she looked unsettled. Not embarrassed, but shaken. Her hands moved to her notes, fumbling for a counterpoint that wouldn't come. But the room had shifted. The studio audience leaned in, drawn to the quiet weight of Keanu's truth. Keanu didn't look at her. He turned to the audience now, holding them in his gaze. You don't have to believe me, he said. Believe the numbers. Believe the families who never knew where the help came from. Believe the kids who got surgeries without a headline. The veterans who walked again because someone they never met covered their therapy. The words weren't designed to impress, they weren't flashy, but they landed with precision, like stones on still water. And I'm not here, Keanu continued, to promote a foundation. I never came to this show for applause. I came because someone asked me to speak about healing, about why I still believe in kindness when the world keeps breaking itself apart. Joy's voice, when it finally returned, sounded oddly small. Then why not talk about it more? If you're doing all this good, why stay silent? Keanu turned to her now, calm but firm. Because kindness isn't a performance, he said. It's not something you rehearse for the camera. You don't feed a hungry family and then hold up a selfie with their empty fridge. You don't rebuild a stranger's home and ask them to tag you on Instagram. The audience murmured again, low, approving. Some clapped quietly, without meaning to. Others sat stunned, visibly moved. Keanu took a slow breath. There's a difference between visibility and virtue. You confuse humility with weakness. But kindness, he said, pausing as his voice took on a new resonance, is strength. The line cut through the air like a blade. You think it's soft, he went on, but try holding your dying daughter's hand, knowing you'd trade every roll, every dollar, every breath just to give her one more day. Then walk back into the world and choose to love it anyway. That's not weakness. Joy blinked. Her jaw tightened. She opened her mouth again, this time with a louder tone. Keanu, let's not pretend you're the only one with grief. Everyone's got... Keanu held up a hand. I would never pretend I'm the only one. I'm saying I've made peace with mine, and that peace lets me serve others. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. Something invisible had shifted. The balance of power on the stage, the dynamic that had always given Joy control, was no longer hers to hold. The camera panned to Whoopi. She looked glassy-eyed, nodding almost imperceptibly. Then Keanu walked a few paces forward, not too close to Joy, but just enough to let the lights catch his expression. We're not here to tear each other apart, he said. We're here to remind people watching that there's still a way to be human in a world drowning in noise. Joy's reply was flat. That's easy to say when you're rich. Keanu didn't flinch. Maybe, he said, but I wasn't always. And even if I lost it all tomorrow, I'd still help where I could. Because my humanity isn't for sale, and if being rich means forgetting where I came from, then I'd rather go back to sleeping on floors. That did it. The audience stood, not all at once, but in rising waves. Applause started from the back row, spreading until the entire room thundered with approval. Keanu didn't bask in it. He stepped back, eyes lowered, letting it pass through him rather than feed him. Joy sat frozen. Her show had slipped away. As the applause softened, Keanu picked up his mic and looked at Joy one last time. "This platform could lift people," he said gently, "but today it tried to humiliate someone who's only ever chosen compassion. That's not just a missed opportunity. That's a wound." He nodded once to the crew, to the audience, then turned and walked off the stage, not in anger, but in purpose. The cameras lingered on Joy, but her power had vanished. The story no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the truth that had just been spoken. And the world was listening. The studio was dead silent as Keanu stood there, eyes steady, voice calm. He looked straight at Joy and said, "Her name was Ava. She would be 25 today." There was no rage in his voice, no shaking, just a deep and immeasurable sorrow, like a man who had carried that grief every day, quietly, and had learned to live alongside it. His words weren't for attention. They weren't for drama. They were simply the truth, unadorned, undeniable. Joy's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Not this time. The force of what Keanu had said, what he had dared to say aloud in front of millions, hung in the air like a weight pressing down on every person in the room. The audience stirred, then rose. The sound began as a rustle, chairs scraping back, hands clapping slowly, and then it erupted. Applause thundered through the studio, not polite, not forced, but raw and real. Some people stood with hands on their hearts, others wiped tears from their faces. A few shouted, "Thank you," or simply clapped harder, hoping it would say what their voices could not. Keanu didn't bask in it. He didn't gesture to quiet the crowd or take a dramatic bow. Instead, he turned slightly, gave a respectful nod to Sunny and Whoopi, and then looked again at Joy. "I won't be your entertainment today," he said. The words weren't harsh. They were clean, pure, like someone washing away something rotten that had tried to cling to his story. He bent down, picked up his gray jacket from the armrest, slipped it on. His hands moved with quiet purpose. He adjusted the collar, fastened the top button, and took one slow step toward the edge of the stage. No music played, no cue cards flipped, no commercial break cut in. He walked. Not rushed, not dramatic, but full of something that felt bigger than defiance. Dignity. A man reclaiming his space, his name, his silence. Behind him, the applause built again. This time it was different. It was for the walk, for the choice, for the boundary that had finally been drawn. When he reached the studio doors, he paused for the briefest moment, not to look back, but as if taking a breath before stepping through something irreversible. Then he pushed them open. The sound they made as they closed behind him wasn't loud, but it was final. It echoed in the bones of the studio, like something sacred had just left the room. Back inside the studio, the silence stretched longer than anyone expected. Joy sat motionless in her chair, face frozen in a mix of disbelief and something deeper, something dangerously close to shame. For once, her words failed her. The audience, still standing, didn't sit back down. They remained on their feet, unsure of whether the show was still happening or if they'd just witnessed its end. Whoopi turned to Sunny, both of them exchanging a glance that said everything. Something had shifted, not just on set, but in the very fabric of what people expected from daytime television. There had always been debates, controversies, uncomfortable exchanges, but this was different. A man had drawn the line, and it wasn't with a fight. It was with truth. Outside the studio, it didn't take long. Within minutes, the clip of Keanu saying, "Her name was Ava. She would be 25 today," had been uploaded, shared, and reposted across every major platform. Keanu vs. Joy trended #1 on X, Instagram Reels exploded with reaction videos, and TikTok was flooded with breakdowns, lip syncs, tributes, and raw commentary. People weren't just watching, they were feeling. "I've never seen anything so brave," one user posted, tears in her eyes as she recorded a selfie response. That wasn't a celebrity moment. That was a father protecting the memory of his child. Another tweet read, "Keanu walking out was the kind of silent power we don't see anymore. Not rage, not ego, just truth." Within the hour, long-form editorials started appearing. Culture critics and journalists analyzed the moment in real time. Even mainstream networks paused scheduled segments to report on what had happened live on The View. It wasn't about celebrity anymore. It was about something deeper: dignity, grief, boundaries. And the public responded, not as fans, but as human beings. One of the most shared comments on YouTube was just 6 words: "Ava is real," and "she mattered." Mainstream media, the movies, TV, and social media, dominated. Those 6 words became a movement of their own. People began posting the names of loved ones they'd lost, using the same format. His name was David. He mattered. Her name was Maya. She was real. It became more than a hashtag. It became a call for compassion, a digital vigil. Back in the studio, producers quietly turned off the main cameras. No one rushed to replace Keanu. No pivot to a new topic. No celebrity chef or musical guest could follow that moment. The show was, for all intents and purposes, over for the day. Joy finally broke her silence. But what came out was not another sharp retort or dismissive laugh. It was a shaky breath, a small whisper. "I went too far." And for once, no one replied. Outside the studio, Keanu didn't look back. The morning sun had climbed higher by the time he reached the sidewalk, but it didn't warm the hollow space left inside him. And yet, he walked with dignity. Not anger, not bitterness, just the quiet peace of a man who had said what needed to be said. Fans waiting by the barriers didn't shout or ask for autographs. They simply stood in silence as he passed. Some placed their hands over their hearts. One young woman whispered, "Thank you for Ava." But the screams and by the time Keanu reached his car, his phone was already flooded with messages, not from agents or publicists, but from people he hadn't heard from in years, former co-stars, friends, even strangers. Each one echoing the same sentiment. "You reminded us of what matters." Keanu paused before opening the door. He looked up at the sky and exhaled. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. Somewhere deeper inside, something settled. Not closure, that wasn't possible, but clarity. As he drove away from the studio, Ava Mattered continued to spread. And in that moment, a private grief had sparked a public awakening, and he never said another word. He didn't need to. The silence that followed Keanu's exit didn't last long. It shattered the moment the heavy doors clicked shut behind him. The audience, stunned just seconds ago, suddenly erupted into chaos. Some rose from their seats and shouted in protest. Others simply stood frozen, hands covering their mouths. One woman near the front row yelled, "Shame on you, Joy!" And her words triggered a wave of murmurs and gasps that rolled through the crowd like thunder. Whoopi Goldberg stood up without hesitation. Her chair scraped the floor with a harsh screech, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes locked onto Joy's with a fire that had been simmering since the first cruel line was crossed. "You didn't just attack a guest," Whoopi said, her voice firm and unyielding. "You attacked a grieving father, a man who's carried more pain than most of us will ever understand. And you mocked it." Joy's eyes flicked toward Whoopi, then away, unable to hold the weight of her gaze. Her lips trembled. For the first time since the segment began, there was no arrogance in her expression. No snark, no smirk, no superiority. Only the bare face of someone who realized, too late, that they'd gone too far. Sarah Haynes leaned forward, mouth slightly open, still processing the moment. Sunny Hostin sat back in her chair, arms crossed, a look of restrained disappointment painting her face. Neither of them said a word at first. The air in the room had changed. What had started as another headline-chasing segment had spiraled into something raw and irreversible. The control room was in disarray. Producers frantically whispered to each other, debating whether to cut the feed or let it run. One of them, a young woman with tears streaming down her cheeks, simply said, "The world needs to see this." Back on stage, Joy tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Her mouth opened, then closed again, as if she couldn't decide where to begin, or if she had the right to begin at all. Finally, she looked down at the floor and whispered something so soft that only Whoopi, sitting nearest, could hear. "I'm miserable." Whoopi's expression didn't change. Joy looked up again, her voice cracking louder this time. "I did it because I'm miserable. Because watching someone like him, so calm, so good, so decent, it makes me confront everything I'm not. His goodness forces me to look at my own ugliness, and I didn't want to face it. So I lashed out." There were no applause, no cheers, just a heavy, collective stillness. Sunny finally spoke. "You don't get to hide behind your pain to justify cruelty. We've all faced things. We've all lost. But Keanu came here in good faith. You turned his tragedy into ammunition." Joy shook her head, as if disagreeing with herself. "I didn't mean to go that far. She stopped. What could she say that would undo what had been done? Sarah, quieter than usual, said gently, "It's not about whether you meant it. It's about what you did, and the harm it caused. To him, to his daughter's memory, to every person watching who's carried grief into a public space and hoped for dignity." The camera panned wide, capturing the stunned faces of the live studio audience. Many people were still seated, holding tissues or silently comforting the person beside them. Others whispered among themselves, clearly shaken by what had just unfolded. The control room director decided to keep the cameras rolling. Every second of this mattered now. Back at the table, Joy tried to pull herself together, but it was like watching someone drown slowly in the truth they had tried to avoid their whole life. "I've spent years building a platform," Joy said, voice shaking, "challenging people, confronting power, exposing lies. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing people. I saw Keanu as a symbol, a persona, not a man." She paused, then added, "I didn't expect him to be so real." Whoopi looked at her, unmoved. "That's the problem. You expected him to be like every other celebrity that comes through here. He wasn't. And instead of listening, you kept trying to make him fit your narrative." Sarah nodded slowly. "The way he spoke about Ava, his daughter. I don't think I'll ever forget that." Sunny said nothing for a moment. Then, finally, "He told us her name, not for sympathy, but for honor. He walked off because he refused to let his daughter's memory be trampled on just to entertain the world." Joy buried her face in her hands. "I've made people laugh for years," she said through muffled sobs. "I thought that was enough, that if I kept being loud, people would forget how empty I felt inside. But today, he didn't try to humiliate me. He didn't fight back. He just stood there and told the truth." There was a long silence. One of the camera operators, tears in his eyes, whispered to a nearby producer, "I've never seen anything like this." The feed didn't cut. Social media lit up with screenshots and quotes. Hashtags exploded across platforms. Keanu vs. Joy, Ava, deserved better, truth over performance. One clip of Keanu simply saying her name was Ava, she would be 25 today, had already gone viral. Thousands were posting their own stories of loss, pain, and being misunderstood. Somehow, Keanu's words had unlocked something universal. In the back of the studio, a stagehand turned off the applause sign. There was nothing to applaud. Joy finally looked up. "I owe him an apology. Not a press statement, not a tweet. A real apology." "Then you'd better find a way to give it," Whoopi said, standing again. Because Keanu doesn't owe this show anything. But maybe we owe the audience something. Something real. Sarah placed a hand on Joy's shoulder. It was a small gesture, but sincere. You still have a voice. Maybe use it to heal something instead of hurt. Joy nodded weakly. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes swollen, but for once the mask was gone. The director's voice came through the earpiece. Keep rolling. Don't cut. The truth is raw, but this is what people need to see. As the lights dimmed slightly and a producer waved off the next segment, the show lingered in silence. Not a performance, not a confrontation, just a reckoning. The black SUV moved slowly through the streets of New York, the hum of traffic muffled behind its thick windows. Marcus sat in the passenger seat, phone pressed to his ear, switching between calls with the calm urgency of someone used to crisis. Every few seconds, a new alert buzzed, or a message popped up on his screen. "Nan wants a statement," he muttered, glancing back. "Ellen's team is asking if you'll call in. TMZ is trying to track where we're heading. They said they're concerned." Keanu didn't respond. He sat in the back seat, still in his blazer, hands folded gently on his lap. His face was unreadable. Eyes locked on the moving city outside the tinted window. The lights flickered across his face. Billboards, taxis, a couple arguing on a sidewalk, a child chasing pigeons in the dusk. Marcus lowered the phone slightly. "You want me to tell them all no?" Another silence. Keanu finally turned his head just enough for Marcus to catch his profile. "Do you think she meant it?" Marcus blinked. "Who?" "Joy," Keanu said quietly. "What she said? About hating herself?" Marcus's expression shifted instantly. "Keanu, come on. After everything she just did to you, you're seriously asking that?" Dean said it like it just slipped out, Keanu murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Like it had been building for years. Marcus set the phone down in his lap and turned fully in his seat. "You don't owe her this kind of thought, man. She tried to break you. On live television, in front of millions." Keanu nodded slightly. "I know. Then why even entertain it?" There was a long pause. The car rolled past a row of food carts, steam rising into the chill evening air. Pedestrians craned their necks, pointing toward the vehicle, some recognizing Keanu through the window. Hurt people, Keanu finally said, his voice nearly a whisper. "That's what I've learned. Doesn't excuse it, doesn't make it okay, but it helps me understand it." Marcus leaned back slowly, exhaling. Man, you're built different." Keanu gave a faint smile. "Not really. I've just been where she is. I know what it's like to lose parts of yourself, to get so used to the pain that you stop seeing the damage you cause to others." Marcus studied him for a second. "And yet you walked off that stage with your dignity intact. That's not weakness. That's strength." Keanu turned back to the window. "It's just compassion." Another message popped up on Marcus's phone. He glanced at it, then said, "Social media is exploding. You've got support pouring in from everywhere. Veterans, single moms, faith groups, even people who never liked you are calling what happened raw truth." Keanu nodded, but didn't light up. His energy was still quiet, still heavy with something deeper than outrage or vindication. "I didn't want to win," he said. "It wasn't a competition." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "It sure looked like one." Keanu shook his head. "It was a conversation that got hijacked by pain, that's all it was." The driver adjusted his rearview mirror to glance at Keanu. "You good, sir?" Keanu gave a small nod. "I will be." The car turned onto Fifth Avenue as street lights bathed the windshield in orange glow. Marcus's phone vibrated again, but he let it sit untouched this time. Keanu's words still hung in the air, more powerful than anything trending online. Marcus finally broke the silence. "You think she's redeemable?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He leaned his head gently against the window, watching a couple embrace beneath a corner lamppost. I don't think that's my call to make. Marcus waited. I think everyone has a line they eventually cross, Keanu continued, but they also have a line they can come back to, a center, a place of truth, if they want it badly enough. He turned to Marcus, his expression soft. Joy might have crossed hers today, but she also revealed something most people never admit out loud, that kind of honesty. Even if it came too late, it's not nothing. You're saying she deserves grace. I'm saying she might need it. Marcus ran a hand down his face, chuckling bitterly. You walked off her set like a legend, and now you're sitting here worrying about whether the person who ambushed you deserves compassion? Keanu's voice was calm. Not worrying, just reflecting. Marcus's tone softened. You're something else, man. Keanu looked out at the fading sky. I just don't want to become the thing I stood up against. That's how cycles continue. And I've seen enough pain in this world to know someone has to break that cycle. They both sat quietly again. The city passed by like a slow-motion reel of lives, intersecting, none of them knowing the storm that had just aired to millions. But in the eye of that storm sat a man who didn't chase revenge or applause. He chased peace. The driver finally spoke. We're 5 minutes out, Mr. Reeves. Do you want to go through the back? Keanu thought for a moment, then shook his head. No. Front entrance. If anyone's waiting, they deserve to see that I'm still standing. Marcus looked over, smile tugging at his lips. You're more than standing, Keanu. You just reminded the world what integrity looks like. The car eased to a stop in front of Keanu's hotel. A small crowd had already gathered, phones raised, some clapping as he stepped out. No security detail, no assistance. Just Keanu, his jacket slung over his shoulder, eyes gentle but unshaken. Marcus stayed behind, watching from the window as Keanu paused before the steps. One young woman in the crowd lowered her phone and simply whispered, "Thank you." Keanu offered a quiet nod in return. Inside the lobby, the concierge greeted him with a hushed reverence. "Mr. Reeves, I saw what happened." Keanu smiled softly. "Hope you're having a peaceful night." As he walked toward the elevator, he felt none of the chaos from earlier. Only stillness. And in that stillness, clarity. What happened on that stage wasn't just a moment of confrontation. It was a mirror. One that revealed not only Joy's bitterness, but Keanu's unwavering conviction. The elevator doors slid closed, his reflection staring back at him. He didn't feel victorious. He felt human. And in a world hungry for spectacle, that simple humanity had just become the loudest message of all. The wind whispered through the trees of rural Vermont, where the world moved slower and the noise of national scandal faded into silence. Nestled near a quiet children's hospital in a town nobody recognized from the tabloids, Joy Behar stepped out of a battered Subaru, hair tucked under a wool beanie. Her makeup gone, her celebrity status buried. She wasn't here to be seen. She was here to disappear. The woman once known for her sharp tongue and louder opinions now went by Mrs. B to the children at the ward. She wasn't introduced as a television host or a celebrity. She wore scrubs like the rest of the volunteers, her ID badge unassuming, her voice quieter. At first, some of the nurses had whispered in recognition, but after seeing her change linens, read bedtime stories, and sweep floors without complaint, they stopped caring. She was just another woman trying to do some good. Joy had arrived there 4 months after the on-air disaster. In the aftermath, the media had cannibalized itself. Clips of Keanu's walkout were played on a loop. Hashtags like "kindness is strength" and "Ava deserved better" trended globally. Sponsors quietly pulled from The View. Editorials questioned the state of daytime TV. And Joy? She vanished. Not to rehab, not to a luxury retreat, but here, to a place where children fought for their lives daily, without a single ounce of cruelty in their hearts. She began keeping a journal, a simple leather notebook that she hid in the drawer beside her cot in the staff dorms. Each night after her shift, she wrote in it, sometimes only a sentence, other times several pages. The early entries were defensive, deflecting. "I was provoked," one read. Another simply said, "He played it perfectly." But over time, her tone shifted. "Why did I think being cruel made me powerful?" she wrote in late October. "He didn't raise his voice once, and he still leveled me." The children didn't know her story. They didn't care. To them, she was the warm lady who brought stickers and silly voices to chemotherapy rooms. She learned their names and their fears. She cried the first time a boy named Jordan clutched her hand during a spinal tap. "You're my brave helper," he whispered. It wrecked her. By midwinter, the nurses began to trust her. One of them, a young mother named Danielle, offered her a spare coat when she saw Joy's sleeves worn thin. "You've been good for them," she said one evening while watching Joy read to the kids huddled under a blanket fort made from IV poles and cartoon sheets. Joy didn't know how to respond. Praise made her uncomfortable now. She only nodded and returned to the story. At night, Joy would reread her journal entries, sometimes aloud to herself. Her words had become confessions. "I ridiculed the grieving. I mocked the man who gave more than I've ever known how to." There was one name that came up again and again: Ava. She had watched the clip of Keanu saying her name at least 50 times. The stillness in his voice, the pain he carried without complaint. It haunted her. She began writing letters she never sent. One was addressed to Keanu. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I finally understand what you meant. Humility is strength, and I've been weak for a long time." Another was to Ava. "If the world were fair, you'd be here, and I'd still be on a set cracking shallow jokes." Meanwhile, Keanu had kept his distance from the media storm. He returned to private life for a time, but quietly began the process of launching something new: the Ava Foundation, a nonprofit focused on helping children who had lost parents, especially those suffering through grief without resources or a voice. No press conference, no photo op, just a press release from his team. "In loving memory of my daughter, whose light still guides my steps." Though society eventually moved on to new viral moments, Keanu's words lingered in culture. Talk shows reviewed their protocols. Audiences began holding celebrities to higher standards of empathy. Online, kindness became cool again, for a while, and Joy remained in Vermont. A different woman now. Her laughter, when it came, was gentler. Her hands moved slower, more carefully, when she tucked a blanket around a sleeping child. Some wounds never fully heal, but in that small ward, amid the hum of IVs and the scent of antiseptic and crayons, she began to learn what redemption truly felt like. One spring morning, Joy sat on the windowsill of the children's wing, holding a sketchbook a little boy named Toby had drawn for her. In crayon, he'd drawn her as a superhero with a cape and a heart on her chest. Above it, in shaky handwriting, "Thank you, Mrs. B, for being my brave lady." She pressed the paper to her chest and wept silently, overwhelmed by something she never thought she'd feel again: worth. That night, she opened her journal and wrote, "I used to think redemption was about being forgiven by the world. Now I think it's about becoming someone worthy of forgiving." She paused, then added, "I still think about Keanu. I think about Ava. I don't know if he'll ever know how he changed me, but that's okay. Some lights guide us without asking for anything in return." In Los Angeles, a quiet ceremony took place at a small children's hospice. The first Ava Foundation grant was being awarded. Keanu attended in the back, avoiding attention, hands folded. He never mentioned Joy. He never needed to. His actions were louder than any speech. Back in Vermont, Joy stepped into the ward the next morning with a new purpose. No makeup, no spotlight. Just a warm smile and 2 arms ready to carry what needed carrying. And as she sat beside a sleeping child battling leukemia, reading a story about hope, she found herself whispering one final line into the quiet. "I wasn't ready for the world you showed me, Keanu, but I'm trying to live like you believed people could." The world didn't need to know what came next, but somehow it already did. The letter arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, just a quiet postmark from Vermont. Keanu sat at his desk, the city lights behind him flickering like distant thoughts. He turned the envelope over once, then again, as if feeling its weight could tell him whether to open it. When he finally did, 12 handwritten pages spilled out. The paper was heavy, the ink slightly smudged, as though some words had been rewritten. Others, perhaps, wept over. It began simply, "Keanu, I know you never asked for this, but I can't move forward until I tell you the truth." Joy Behar's handwriting was neat but hesitant, like someone relearning how to speak. She began with the moment he walked onto that stage, the weight of her jealousy, her fear, her bitterness. She wrote about years of projecting her own emptiness onto others, hiding behind sarcasm and bravado to feel powerful in a world where her own relevance was slipping. "I wasn't mocking you," she wrote. "I was mocking who I never had the courage to be." She confessed to watching the clip hundreds of times, not to justify her actions, but to witness the strength she tried to tear down. She wrote about Ava, about how his pain, spoken with outrage, made her confront everything she had run from. How she broke down that night, not because of public outrage, but because of the mirror he held up, without even trying. "I volunteer now," she wrote. "I spend my mornings cleaning up art supplies and handing out stickers to children who shouldn't have to know the word cancer. They call me Mrs. B. It's the first time in my life I've felt needed in a way that has nothing to do with a camera." She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't expect a response. She just wanted him to know that something in her had changed, not because of a scandal or a fall from grace, but because someone like him had the strength to walk away instead of lash out. Keanu read the final line several times. "Kindness, I've learned, is louder than cruelty, even when it whispers." He folded the pages carefully, then sat in silence, his fingers resting on the letter as though absorbing its intent. The city continued humming around him, but inside something settled. He picked up the phone. Joy was alone in her kitchen when the phone rang. She almost didn't answer. The number was unknown, area code unfamiliar, but something about it made her pause, then reach for the receiver with trembling hands. "Hello?" A long silence. Then his voice, steady, calm, unmistakable. "Joy." She couldn't speak, her throat locked, her chest tightened. She leaned against the counter, tears already forming before he said another word. "I got your letter," Keanu said gently. Still, she couldn't bring herself to respond. "I'm not calling to rehash what happened," he continued. "You already did that better than anyone could." Joy whispered, "I didn't write it to be forgiven." "I know," Keanu replied. "And I'm not calling to forgive you." Another pause. "I'm calling to acknowledge that you changed." Joy closed her eyes. That alone was more than she ever expected. "Yeah." He let the moment breathe, then added quietly, "It's not who you were that day on that stage. It's who you choose to be every day after." His words landed softly, like rain on scorched ground. No grand speech, no absolution, just truth. She managed a weak, "Thank you." Keanu offered nothing more than a quiet, "Take care of those kids, Mrs. B." Then the line went silent. Joy stared at the phone, stunned by the absence of condemnation. In that stillness, she realized the conversation was never about erasing the past. It was about honoring the effort to become better. For Keanu, that call wasn't about her. It was about choosing compassion once more. Not to make a point, not to be admired, but because he could. because he believed people were more than their worst moments. He stood by the window again, watching the stars emerge one by one. He didn't need the world to know about the call. Some acts of grace don't need an audience. What mattered was this. A man broken by tragedy showed mercy to the very person who tried to humiliate him, and in doing so, showed the world what real strength looks like. The letter was folded neatly beside Keanu's journal, untouched since the call. He didn't reread it. He didn't need to. The act of writing it was what mattered. Her voice was different now, no longer sharp, no longer defensive. It was quiet, vulnerable, almost childlike. And in that humility, something sacred had begun. Months passed, and Joy's story quietly traveled in whispers through the industry. She remained in Vermont, choosing service over spectacle. The talk shows didn't chase her anymore. The world had moved on to newer scandals. But the ripples remain. TV producers instituted training about guest trauma. Writers reflected more deeply on what it meant to ask real questions instead of manufacturing outrage. A few shows even changed their formats entirely. And behind it all, no one forgot that moment. Not because it was explosive, but because it was human. Keanu never gave an interview about it, never issued a statement, never took credit. Instead, he let his silence speak. And in doing so, gave the world a new kind of language. One written in empathy, not ego. Now it's your turn. What would you have done in Keanu's place? Would you have walked off, fought back, or said nothing at all? And more importantly, do you believe kindness can change even the hardest hearts? Tell us in the comments below. Your voice matters. Your story might be the next incredible story we share. Because in a world that often chooses cruelty, choosing grace is the real revolution. And maybe, just maybe, that revolution begins with you.